In the rugged frontier of Wyoming Territory, 1885, a woman's carefully laid plans for a new life are shattered when she discovers her intended husband isn't waiting with open arms, but languishing behind prison bars. With nothing but his letters, a deed of ownership, and her own fierce determination, Eleanor Mitchell must decide whether to abandon her dreams or fight for them against ruthless cattle barons, suspicious townsfolk, and the unforgiving land itself. This is the story of a woman who crossed a continent to marry a stranger, only to find herself defending his legacy while uncovering the truth that could set him free. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach lurched violently as the wheels crashed through another deep rut, sending Eleanor Mitchell's hatbox tumbling from the seat beside her. She lunged forward, catching it just before it hit the muddy floor, then carefully returned it to the seat, securing it more firmly this time. The journey from Philadelphia had been endless. First by train across the vast expanse of America, then by this bone-jarring stagecoach for the final leg to Pine Ridge, Wyoming Territory. "First time out west, ma'am?" asked the man seated across from her, a kindly-looking fellow with a weathered face and twinkling eyes. Eleanor nodded, attempting to tuck a stray lock of auburn hair back into her once neat chignon. "Is it that obvious? Most folks round here don't bother with fancy clothes when traveling," he said with a gentle smile, gesturing to her deep green traveling suit. "Too much dust and too many bumps." Eleanor glanced down at her attire once. Pristine and fashionable, now wrinkled and coated with a fine layer of yellowish dust. The hem was frayed where it had dragged across countless train platforms and stagecoach steps. "I suppose I have much to learn," she admitted. The truth was, she had given little thought to practical matters when packing her trunks. Her mind had been filled with the promise of a new life with Jackson Thornton, whose letters had captivated her for nearly a year. A successful rancher with holdings outside Pine Ridge, Jackson had placed an advertisement in an eastern newspaper, seeking a bride, and his words had reached straight into Eleanor's lonely heart. At 30 years old, Eleanor had resigned herself to spinsterhood. The war had taken so many young men, and her position as a schoolteacher in Philadelphia offered security but little opportunity for romance. Jackson's letters had awakened something in her that she thought had died long ago. Hope for a family of her own. "Pine Ridge coming up," the driver called from above, pulling Eleanor from her thoughts. Her heart quickened. After months of correspondence and weeks of travel, she was finally here. She straightened her jacket and adjusted her hat, wanting to look presentable for the man whose passionate letters she carried close to her heart. The stagecoach rolled to a stop in a cloud of dust before a wooden building with "Hawkins General Store and Post Office" painted in large letters across its front. Eleanor accepted the driver's hand and stepped down onto the main street of Pine Ridge, a single dirt road lined with wooden buildings, so different from Philadelphia's bustling cobblestone streets. Miss Mitchell, a tall man with spectacles, approached, removing his hat. He had kind eyes but a somber expression that immediately sent a chill through her. "Yes, that's me," she replied, extending her gloved hand. "Walter Hawkins, ma'am. I own the general store and serve as postmaster." He took her hand briefly, then twisted his hat nervously in his hands. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news." The world seemed to slow around her. "Is it Jackson? Is he ill?" Hawkins glanced around, lowering his voice. "Perhaps we should speak." Inside, Miss Mitchell, Eleanor followed him into the general store, her legs suddenly unsteady. The shop was well stocked with goods ranging from fabric to canned foods, tools to medicines. At the back was a small office where Hawkins offered her a seat. "Tea?" he asked, and she nodded, grateful for the delay, for the chance to steel herself against whatever news was coming. While he prepared the tea, Eleanor tried to calm her racing heart. Perhaps Jackson had been called away on business. Perhaps there had been some trouble with the ranch that delayed their meeting. Hawkins returned with 2 steaming cups and settled across from her. "Miss Mitchell, I regret to inform you that Jackson Thornton is currently being held at Wyoming Territorial Prison in Laramie." The teacup trembled in Eleanor's hand. "Prison? There must be some mistake." Hawkins sighed heavily. "No mistake, ma'am. He was convicted 3 months ago of cattle rustling, sentenced to 5 years. "That's impossible," Eleanor said, setting down her cup before she dropped it. "Jackson owns one of the largest ranches in the territory. Why would he steal cattle?" "That's what many folks wondered," Hawkins admitted. "There are those who believe he was framed by the Hargrove outfit. They've been trying to get Thornton's land for years, especially since the railroad announced plans to expand through these parts." Eleanor struggled to process this information. The man whose letters had been so eloquent, so honorable, a convicted thief. It didn't align with anything she knew of him. Did he know I was coming? Did he send a word to stop me? "He tried," Hawkins said, retrieving a letter from his desk. "This arrived last week, but you were already en route. The postal service isn't exactly swift out here." Eleanor took the envelope with trembling fingers. Her name was written in the now familiar flowing script she had come to cherish. "You must have a family back east you can return to?" Hawkins asked, gently. The question brought home the reality of her situation. Her teaching position had been filled. She had sold most of her possessions to finance this journey. Her parents were gone, and her only sister had moved to California years ago. "No," she said quietly. "There's nothing for me to return to." Hawkins looked uncomfortable. "Well, I'm sure we can arrange for you to stay at the boarding house while you decide what to do. Mrs. Whitaker is a kind woman, though her rates are—" "I can pay," Eleanor interrupted, though she knew her funds were limited. She had expected to step into marriage and a home, not to be stranded in a strange town with her intended in prison. "There's also the matter of Mr. Thornton's property," Hawkins continued. "His ranch, the cattle. What about them?" "The rocking. T is still operating, though with reduced staff. Jackson's foreman, Sam Hollister, has kept things running, but it's been difficult. The Hargroves have been pressing their advantage, trying to force a sale." Before Eleanor could respond, the store's door burst open, and raised voices carried from the main room. "You think you can just take Thornton's land now that he's locked up?" a man shouted. "The bank has first claim, Hollister, and don't you forget it," another voice answered. "That land was promised as collateral for supplies, and you know it, Wilson." Hawkins shook his head. "I apologize for this display, Miss Mitchell. As you can gather, Jackson Thornton's imprisonment has created some complications." "Who are those men?" Eleanor asked. "The angry one is Sam Hollister, Jackson's foreman. The other is Edwin Wilson, who runs the bank. There are several parties who believe they have a claim to the rocking tea now that Jackson's situation has changed." "What about me?" Eleanor asked. "Surely, as his intended wife, I have some claim." Hawkins looked uncomfortable. "Without a formal marriage having taken place, I'm afraid the law doesn't recognize your position as having any legal standing unless Mr. Thornton left specific provisions." Eleanor's mind raced. Everything she had planned, everything she had dreamed was crumbling around her, yet something inside her rebelled against the idea of simply giving up and returning east. "Mr. Hawkins, I need to understand exactly what's happening with Jackson's ranch, and I'd like to read his letter privately, if I may." "Of course," Hawkins said, rising. "Take all the time you need. I'll be in the store if you have questions." Alone. In the small office, Eleanor broke the seal on Jackson's letter, her heart pounding. My dearest Eleanor, by the time you receive this, you may already be on your way west, and for that, I am deeply sorry. Events have transpired that I could never have foreseen, and I now write to you from a prison cell in Laramie. I have been convicted of a crime I did not commit. Victor Hargrove and his sons have long wanted my land, and they have finally found a way to take it by framing me for cattle rustling. I had no opportunity to warn you in time. I release you from any obligation you might feel toward me. You deserve far better than a man behind bars. Please accept my deepest apologies for bringing you into this unfortunate situation. If you have not yet departed Philadelphia, stay there and build the life you deserve. With profound regret and enduring affection, Jackson Eleanor read the letter twice more, searching for clues, for some hint of falsehood, but found only the same honest voice that had filled all his previous correspondence. In her heart, she knew Jackson Thornton was innocent. She folded the letter carefully and placed it in her reticule, then stepped out into the main store. The argument had ended, but tension lingered in the air. Hawkins was serving a customer, while in the corner a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark hair and a worn leather vest stood examining a ledger. He looked up as she approached, his blue eyes sharp and assessing. "Miss Mitchell?" he asked, his voice matching the angry one she'd heard earlier. "Yes. And you must be Mr. Hollister, Jackson's foreman." He nodded, closing the ledger. "Sam Hollister. I was hoping to meet you under better circumstances." "As was I," Eleanor replied. "Mr. Hawkins has explained the situation, though I suspect there's more to know." "There always is in Pine Ridge," Hollister said grimly, "especially where the Hargroves are concerned." "You believe Jackson was framed?" "I know it," Hollister said firmly. "I was there the night they claim he was stealing Hargrove cattle. He was at the ranch house with me, going over the books. But my testimony wasn't enough against the 3 Hargrove hands who swore they saw him cutting their fence and driving off 20 head. Eleanor studied the man before her, looking for signs of deception but finding only frustration and loyalty. "I'd like to see the ranch," she said suddenly, surprising herself with the decision. "And I'd like to visit Jackson, if possible." Hollister's eyebrows rose. "The prison's a 2-day ride to Laramie. As for the ranch, I can take you out there now if you'd like, but Miss Mitchell, you should know, it's not what it once was. We've had to sell off half the herd to keep going, and the house." He trailed off. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The house. It was built for you," Hollister said simply. "Jackson spent months getting it ready, had furniture brought in from Denver, but after the trial, some of the men left, and there was a fire in the East Wing. We managed to save most of it, but it's not in the condition he would have wanted you to see." Unexpected tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes. A house built for her by a man she had never met, now standing damaged and half empty. "I still want to see it," she said firmly. "Miss Mitchell," Hawkins interrupted, approaching them, "I've arranged a room for you at the boarding house. Perhaps you should rest after your journey before making any decisions." Eleanor considered the suggestion. She was exhausted, dusty, and emotionally drained. Yet the thought of lying in a strange bed, while Jackson's enemies circled his property like vultures, made her chest tighten with resolve. "Thank you, Mr. Hawkins, but I believe I'll go directly to the ranch. Mr. Hollister can escort me." "That's not advisable," Hawkins said, glancing nervously at Hollister. "The ranch is isolated, and with your reputation to consider—" "My reputation?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "I've crossed half a continent to marry Jackson Thornton. The fact that he's currently indisposed doesn't change my intention to honor that commitment." Hollister's expression shifted, a hint of respect appearing in his eyes. "There's a housekeeper at the ranch, Mrs. Bird. She's been keeping things in order. Your reputation would be safe." "Then it's settled," Eleanor said with a decisiveness that belied her inner turmoil. "Mr. Hawkins, please have my trunk sent out to the Rocking T. Mr. Hollister, I'll need a few moments to refresh myself, and then we can depart." As Eleanor stepped into the store's small washroom to clean the dust from her face, she caught sight of her reflection in the cloudy mirror. The woman who stared back at her looked different somehow, her eyes harder, her jaw set with determination. She had come west to start a new life, and despite this unexpected turn, she intended to do just that. Outside the general store, as Hollister helped her into his wagon, Eleanor became aware of eyes watching from the saloon across the street. A tall man with silver streaks, dark hair, and an expensive suit stood on the porch, flanked by two younger men who bore a striking resemblance to him. "Victor Hargrove and his sons," Hollister muttered, following her gaze. "The oldest is Luke, the other's Matthew. They're trouble, all three." Victor Hargrove raised his hand in a mocking salute, and Eleanor stared back coldly before turning away. "Miss Mitchell," Hollister said as he climbed up beside her, "are you certain about this? The Rocking T isn't just short-handed, it's under siege. The Hargroves have been running off our cattle, intimidating our hands, and the bank's threatening foreclosure." Eleanor looked once more at the three men, still watching them from across the street, then at the dusty main road of Pine Ridge, with its humble buildings and curious onlookers. This wasn't the arrival she had dreamed of, but perhaps it was the one she needed. "Mr. Hollister," she said, straightening her shoulders, "I may not know much about ranching, but I know about fighting for what matters. If Jackson Thornton is the man his letters suggest, then he deserves someone willing to stand for him in his absence." Hollister studied her for a long moment, then nodded and flicked the reins. "Yes, ma'am," he said simply, and the wagon lurched forward, carrying Eleanor Mitchell toward a future she could never have imagined, not as a bride, but as a defender of a legacy that wasn't yet hers, for a man she had never met. The road to the Rocking T stretched before them, winding through the rugged Wyoming landscape. As the town of Pine Ridge receded behind them, Eleanor felt a strange mix of trepidation and resolve. She had crossed a continent based on the words of a man now imprisoned. Wisdom dictated she should turn back, yet something deeper than wisdom drove her forward, perhaps the same courage that had prompted her to answer a stranger's advertisement in the first place. Whatever awaited her at the Rocking T, Eleanor Mitchell was determined to face it head-on. For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, she felt certain she was heading in the right direction. The Rocking T ranch emerged from behind a stand of pines as the wagon crested a hill. Eleanor caught her breath at the sight spreading before her. Despite Sam Hollister's warnings, the property was impressive. A sprawling main house with a charred eastern wing, several outbuildings, barns, corrals, and beyond them, rolling grasslands that seemed to stretch to the distant mountains. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It was Jackson's pride," Hollister replied, his voice softening. 15,000 acres, good water, fine grazing. Took him 10 years to build it up from nothing. As they approached, Eleanor noted the details that spoke of recent hardship. Unmended fences, fewer cattle than such vast pastures could support, an air of quiet where there should have been bustling activity. A woman emerged from the main house as they drew near, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 60, with iron-grey hair pulled tight in a bun, and a face that suggested she smiled rarely. "That's Mrs. Bird," Hollister explained. "Best cook in 3 counties and loyal to the bone." The wagon rolled to a stop, and Hollister helped Eleanor down. Her legs were stiff from the journey, and she was grateful for his steady hand. "Mrs. Bird, this is Miss Eleanor Mitchell," Hollister called. "Jackson's intended." The older woman's severe expression didn't change as she looked Eleanor up and down. Thought you might not come once you heard." "I didn't know until I arrived in town," Eleanor replied, refusing to be intimidated. Mrs. Bird studied her a moment longer, then nodded once. "Well, you're here now. Come inside. You look half-starved and there's stew on the stove." The interior of the house surprised Eleanor. Despite the damage to one wing, the main rooms were well appointed with quality furniture, polished wood floors, and unexpected touches of refinement. A piano stood in one corner of the parlor, bookshelves lined one wall, and landscape paintings hung in gilt frames. "Jackson had it all brought in from Denver last fall," Mrs. Bird explained, noting Eleanor's gaze. "Said a lady from the East would expect certain comforts." Eleanor ran her fingers along the spines of the books, Shakespeare, Dickens, Thoreau. "He chose well," she murmured. "Your room's upstairs," Mrs. Bird continued. "I've kept it ready, just in case. Supper in 30 minutes. Left alone to explore, Eleanor moved through the house that should have been her home, trying to reconcile the reality before her with the dreams she had nurtured during the long journey west. In Jackson's study, she found a desk of solid oak, papers neatly arranged, ledgers stacked in one corner. On the wall hung a map of the rocking T, its boundaries carefully marked. The upper floor contained several bedrooms, including one that clearly had been prepared for her arrival. A 4-poster bed with a handmade quilt, a dressing table with a silver brush set, curtains that matched the bedspread, all spoke of careful planning and consideration. Eleanor sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing the events of the day to wash over her. Tears threatened, but she blinked them back. There would be time for tears later. First, she needed answers. Downstairs, she found Hollister and Mrs. Bird waiting in the dining room. A third place had been set at the large table. "That's Michael Quinn's place," Hollister explained. "He's our remaining hand. Others left after Jackson was arrested." "Rats deserting a sinking ship," Mrs. Bird muttered, setting a pot of stew on the table. "They had families to feed," Hollister corrected gently. "Can't blame a man for seeking steady work." As they ate, Eleanor gathered her courage. "I need to understand exactly what happened. How did Jackson come to be accused of rustling?" Hollister and Mrs. Bird exchanged glances. "Started about 8 months ago," Hollister began. "The railroad announced plans to extend a line through the territory. Suddenly, land values doubled overnight. Victor Hargrove, he owns the Double H to the north, made Jackson an offer for the rocking T. A pitiful offer," Mrs. Bird interjected. "Jackson refused," Hollister continued. "Said the rocking T wasn't for sale at any price. That's when the trouble began. Fences cut, cattle scattered, water rights disputed, just enough to make things difficult, but nothing we could prove was Hargrove's doing. Then came the rustling accusations," Mrs. Bird said, her voice bitter. 20 head of Hargrove cattle found in our north pasture, our brand freshly burned over theirs." "I was with Jackson that night," Hollister added. "We were right here in this house, going over the books until past midnight. But 3 Hargrove hands swore they saw Jackson cutting fences and driving those cattle onto rocking T land. The same 3 hands who'd been in the saloon all evening, according to Lily at the boarding house," Mrs. Bird said. "But her testimony wasn't allowed. Judge Wilson is Edwin Wilson's brother, the banker you met in town." The trial was a farce, Hollister concluded. 12 men, half of them in debt to Wilson's bank or doing business with Hargrove. They deliberated for less than an hour. Eleanor processed this information, anger building within her. "So Jackson is in prison on false testimony while the Hargroves and the Wilsons try to seize his land?" "That's the size of it," Hollister confirmed. 5-year sentence. By the time he's released, there won't be a rocking T left to come back to. Banks already started foreclosure proceedings, claiming Jackson defaulted on his loans. But if the ranch is still operating, the terms changed after his conviction, Hollister explained. "Wilson called in the note early, demanding full payment. We don't have that kind of cash, not after selling half the herd to keep going." "What about an appeal? Surely there's a higher court." Costs money we don't have, Hollister said. And takes time we can't spare. The arrival of Michael Quinn interrupted their conversation. He was a young man, barely 20, with sun-bleached hair and a face that hadn't yet hardened to the elements. He nodded respectfully to Eleanor after introductions. Hargrove hands were at the fence line again today, he reported to Hollister. Luke and 3 others said they were just passing through, but they were counting our herd, plain as day, preparing. For when they take over, Mrs. Bird muttered darkly. After supper, Eleanor retreated to Jackson's study, drawn to the place where he had spent his evenings. A half-written letter still sat on the desk, dated 3 days before his arrest. It was addressed to her, and with trembling fingers she picked it up. My dear Eleanor, the house is finally ready for your arrival. Mrs. Bird thinks I've gone mad with all the improvements, but I want everything to be perfect when you step through that door. I find myself counting the days until May, when the stage will bring you to Pine Ridge and to me. There have been some complications with neighboring ranches that I'm working to resolve. Nothing for you to worry about, but the letter ended there, unfinished. Eleanor set it down carefully, her resolve strengthening. Whatever the cost, she would not let this ranch, the home Jackson had prepared with such care, fall into the hands of those who had framed him. A soft knock at the door announced Hollister. Miss Mitchell, I thought you should see these before making any decisions about your future. He placed a wooden box on the desk. Jackson kept all your letters. He used to read them to us sometimes, on long winter evenings. Eleanor opened the box, finding her own letters neatly bundled and tied with string. Beneath them lay a small leather pouch and an official-looking document. He added those items the day before his arrest, Hollister said. Made me promise to keep the box safe in case anything happened to him. Eleanor unfolded the document, her breath catching as she read. It was a deed of ownership for the Rocking T Ranch, with a transfer of title to Eleanor Mitchell, my intended bride, signed and dated by Jackson Thornton and witnessed by Sam Hollister and Martha Bird. He knew, she whispered. He suspected. They might try to frame him. He feared something might happen, Hollister agreed. Didn't know what, but wanted to protect the ranch. And you. The leather pouch contained a simple gold band and a small note in Jackson's handwriting, for the day we stand before God and our neighbors as husband and wife. It was my mother's. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes as she slipped the ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large, but its weight was comforting, a connection to the man she had come to marry. Does anyone else know about this deed? She asked, wiping away her tears. No, Hollister replied. Jackson had me file a copy with the land office in Cheyenne, but the local records show him as sole owner. Wilson and Hargrove believe the ranch will be forfeited when the bank forecloses. Eleanor studied the deed again. Then we have an advantage they don't know about. According to this, I am the legal owner of the Rocking T. Yes, ma'am, you are, Hollister said, a hint of admiration in his voice. Question is, what do you plan to do with it? Eleanor looked up, her decision already made. I plan to save it, Mr. Hollister, for Jackson. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Eleanor rose early, having slept fitfully despite her exhaustion. After dressing in the most practical clothes she had brought, a simple navy skirt and white shirtwaist, she went downstairs to find Hollister already at the table with Mrs. Bird. I'd like to see the ranch today, she announced. All of it. Hollister looked surprised but nodded. I'll saddle 2 horses. Can you ride, Miss Mitchell? I took lessons in Philadelphia, she replied, though I suspect Western riding may be different. Wear these, Mrs. Bird said, producing a pair of leather gloves, and take my old hat. That bonnet of yours won't last an hour in the sun. By mid-morning, Eleanor was astride a gentle mare named Daisy, following Hollister as he led her across the Rocking T. The vastness of it took her breath away. Meadows giving way to pine forests, streams cutting through valleys, and always, The distant mountains standing guard. The boundary with Hargrove's double H is up ahead, Hollister explained as they rode. That's where most of the trouble has been. They approached a fence line where several posts had recently been replaced. Cut 3 times in the last month, Hollister said. Cattle wander through, then Hargrove claims they're on his land illegally. What's beyond that ridge? Eleanor asked, pointing to the north. That's where the railroad survey team marked the route for the new line. It's why this land suddenly became so valuable. The spur will run right through the eastern section of the rocking T, a perfect place for a depot and loading pens. And the Hargroves' land? Misses it by 2 miles, Hollister said with a grim smile. Worth half what this place is, with the railroad coming through. As they continued their tour, Eleanor asked detailed questions about the operations of the ranch, how many cattle remained, the condition of the wells and streams, the state of the finances. Hollister answered frankly, holding nothing back. We're down to about 800 head, he explained. Should be twice that. We've had to sell off stock to meet expenses, and we've lost more to Hargrove's mischief. And the banknote? Due in full in 30 days. Wilson moved fast after Jackson's conviction. Eleanor nodded, thinking, is there a lawyer in Pine Ridge? Someone not connected to the Wilsons or Hargroves? No, Hollister said. Nearest honest lawyer would be in Laramie or Cheyenne. Then that's where we'll go, Eleanor decided, after I visit Jackson. They were riding along the eastern boundary when 4 riders appeared on a nearby hill. Even at a distance, Eleanor recognized Victor Hargrove's silver-streaked hair. Keep riding, Hollister murmured. Don't show concern. But the riders were already approaching, cutting across the pasture directly toward them. Hollister moved his horse subtly between Eleanor and the oncoming men. Well, well, Victor Hargrove called, as they drew near. Seeing the spoils before they're yours, Miss Mitchell? Eleanor straightened in the saddle, meeting his gaze directly. I'm surveying my property, Mr. Hargrove. A flicker of surprise crossed Hargrove's face before his confident smile returned. Your property? I think you misunderstand the situation. This land will be sold at auction when the bank forecloses, and I intend to be the highest bidder. I'm afraid you're the one who misunderstands, Eleanor replied coolly. The rocking T belongs to me, by legal deed of transfer, signed and witnessed, before Jackson's arrest. This time Hargrove couldn't hide his shock. Beside him, his oldest son, Luke, leaned forward in his saddle. She's bluffing, Luke said. Thornton would never, I assure you, I have the deed in my possession, Eleanor interrupted. Properly. Filed with the Territorial Land Office in Cheyenne. Victor Hargrove's face darkened. Convenient story from a woman who arrived just yesterday. No one in Pine Ridge will believe it. They don't need to, Hollister cut in. The law will recognize it, and that's what matters. Hargrove studied Eleanor, reassessing. Even if such a deed exists, it won't help you run this ranch. A woman alone, with no knowledge of cattle or this country, you'll fail within a month. I'm not alone, Eleanor replied, nodding toward Hollister. And I'm a quick study, Mr. Hargrove. We'll see about that. Hargrove turned his horse. Luke, Matthew, come along. Miss Mitchell and I will continue this discussion another time. As the Hargroves rode away, Eleanor released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was a dangerous move, Hollister said quietly. Hargrove doesn't take well to being surprised. I needed to see his reaction, Eleanor replied. Now, we know he wasn't aware of the deed, and now he'll be looking for ways to challenge it, Hollister warned. You've made yourself a target, Miss Mitchell. Eleanor watched the retreating riders, a chill running through her despite the warm sun. I became a target the moment I decided to stand by Jackson. At least now I know who my enemies are. They rode in silence back to the ranch house, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached, Eleanor noticed her trunks had been delivered and sat waiting on the porch. I'll help Mrs. Bird get those upstairs, Hollister offered as they dismounted. Thank you. Eleanor removed her borrowed hat and gloves. Mr. Hollister, I need to send telegrams to Laramie and Cheyenne, to a lawyer and to the prison warden, arranging a visit with Jackson. I'll ride into town tomorrow, he promised. That evening, after a simple supper, Eleanor sat at Jackson's desk and opened her writing case. First, she drafted a telegram to a law firm in Cheyenne, whose name she had noted from a document in Jackson's files. Next, a formal request to the warden of Wyoming Territorial Prison, seeking permission to visit Jackson Thornton as his legal representative and fiancé. Finally, she began a letter to Jackson himself, the words flowing easily despite the strangeness of writing to a man she had never met, yet felt she knew intimately. My dear Jackson, she arrived in Pine Ridge yesterday to find circumstances far different than either of us anticipated. Please know that I do not for one moment believe the charges against you. Mr. Hollister has explained the situation, and I have already encountered the Hargroves. I understand now what manner of men would frame an innocent neighbor for their own gain. I want you to know that I have seen the rocking tea, and it is as beautiful as you described in your letters. The house you prepared for me speaks volumes about your character and thoughtfulness. I am staying there now with Mrs. Bird and Mr. Hollister, who have been most kind and helpful. Mr. Hollister has given me the box containing the deed and your mother's ring. The deed has been safely stored, and the ring I wear on a chain around my neck, close to my heart, until the day we can properly exchange vows. I intend to visit you as soon as arrangements can be made. Until then, please take comfort in knowing that I am here, that I believe in your innocence, and that I will do everything in my power to protect what you have built until you can return to it, and to me. With deepest affection, Eleanor. She sealed the letter, then sat back, gazing out the window at the darkening sky. In just 2 days, her life had changed beyond recognition. She had come west, expecting to start a new life as a wife. Instead, she found herself thrust into the role of ranch owner, facing powerful enemies and a legal battle she scarcely understood. Yet, despite the fear and uncertainty, Eleanor felt a strange sense of purpose growing within her. Jackson Thornton had reached out across a continent, seeking a partner brave enough to leave everything familiar behind. Now, though circumstances had changed, the essence remained the same. 2 people facing the wilderness together, even separated by prison walls. As stars appeared in the Wyoming sky, Eleanor made a silent promise to the man whose letters had brought her here. She would fight for the rocking tea with every ounce of determination she possessed. And when Jackson Thornton walked free, whether through legal appeal or completed sentence, he would find his home and his bride waiting. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Bird entered with a steaming cup of tea. "Thought you might need this," the older woman said, setting the cup on the desk. "First nights in a new place are always the hardest." "Thank you, Mrs. Bird." Eleanor smiled gratefully. "I was just writing to Jackson." Mrs. Bird nodded approval. "Good. He needs to know he's not forgotten." "Mrs. Bird," Eleanor began hesitantly, "do you believe there's any chance of proving Jackson's innocence before he serves his full sentence?" The housekeeper's face grew solemn. "Truth has a way of coming to light, Miss Mitchell, but in these parts it often needs a helping hand." She paused at the door. "Rest now. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." Left alone once more, Eleanor sipped her tea and contemplated the older woman's words. If truth needed a helping hand, then she would provide it. Somehow, she would find evidence of Jackson's innocence. The rocking tea creaked and settled around her, a living entity adjusting to her presence. Outside, a coyote called into the night, its cry echoing across the valley. Eleanor Mitchell, Philadelphia schoolteacher, mail-order bride, and now unexpected ranch owner, listened to the unfamiliar sounds of her new home and prepared herself for the battles ahead. The journey to Wyoming Territorial Prison in Laramie took 2 days of hard travel. Eleanor rode beside Sam Hollister in the ranch wagon, her body aching from the constant jarring over rutted trails, but her mind focused entirely on the meeting ahead. They had spent the night at a small way station, where Eleanor had lain awake listening to unfamiliar sounds, coyotes calling, the wind pushing against loose boards, the occasional movement of horses in the nearby corral. Now, as they approached the imposing stone structure that housed Jackson Thornton, Eleanor felt her heart racing. The prison rose from the plains like an ancient fortress, grey walls and guard towers stark against the blue Wyoming sky. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" Hollister asked, as he brought the wagon to a stop at the visitor's entrance. Eleanor nodded, smoothing her best dress, a deep blue that matched her eyes. "I think it's best for our first meeting. I'll explain everything to him, including our plan for the ranch." "I'll wait right here," Hollister promised. The processing took nearly an hour, papers examined, identity verified, possessions temporarily surrendered. A stern-faced matron searched Eleanor with cold efficiency. Then a guard led her through a series of locked gates to a small bare room with a scarred wooden table and 2 chairs. "Thornton will be brought in momentarily," the guard informed her. "You have 30 minutes, no physical contact permitted." Eleanor clasped her hands in her lap to hide their trembling. After months of correspondence, after traveling thousands of miles, she was about to meet Jackson Thornton for the first time, across a prison table with guards watching their every move. The door opened, and Eleanor rose to her feet. The man who entered bore little resemblance to the confident rancher she had imagined from his letters. Jackson Thornton was tall, as she had expected, with broad shoulders now stooped slightly in the ill-fitting prison uniform. His once sun-darkened face had paled during months indoors, and his sandy hair was cropped short according to prison regulations. But his eyes, warm brown with flecks of gold, were exactly as he had described them in a rare moment of personal detail in one of his letters. Those eyes widened in disbelief when they fell upon her. "Eleanor?" His voice was rough, as if from disuse. "Hello, Jackson." She smiled, fighting back tears at the sight of him in such circumstances. He stood frozen for a moment, then slowly took the seat across from her. "You came," he said simply, wonderment in his voice. "Even after my letter—" "I was already in Pine Ridge when your letter arrived," she explained. "Mr. Hawkins gave it to me, along with the news of your situation." Jackson's face darkened with shame. "I never wanted you to see me like this. You should have gone back." "East? To what?" Eleanor asked. "I sold my possessions, gave up my teaching position. Besides, I came to marry you, Jackson Thornton, not your circumstances." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You're exactly as your letters suggested, determined and forthright." "And you're innocent of the charges against you," she replied. "Mr. Hollister and Mrs. Bird have explained everything." Jackson leaned forward, lowering his voice. "They framed me, Eleanor, Hargrove and Wilson. They wanted my land for the railroad spur, and when I wouldn't sell—" "I know," she interrupted. "I've met them both. Hargrove came to the Rocking T yesterday to assess his future property." Alarm flashed across Jackson's face. "You're staying at the ranch?" "Eleanor, that's not safe. These men are dangerous." "So am I, when provoked," she replied with a confidence she didn't entirely feel. "Besides, I have good reason to stay. Mr. Hollister gave me the box you left in his keeping." Understanding dawned in Jackson's eyes. "The deed. You've seen it?" "Yes. According to Territorial law, I'm now the legal owner of the Rocking T Ranch. Wilson can't foreclose on property that isn't yours to lose." For the first time, genuine hope appeared in Jackson's expression. "You'd do that? Take on the responsibility of the ranch while I'm in here?" "I already have," Eleanor said. I've met with a lawyer in Cheyenne, Andrew Parker. He's filed the deed with the land office and is preparing documents to stop the foreclosure proceedings. He believes we have a strong case." Jackson shook his head in wonder. "I drafted that deed as a precaution, never truly believing I'd be convicted. I wanted you to have security if anything happened to me." He hesitated. "The ring was in the box as well?" Eleanor pulled a fine gold chain from beneath her collar, revealing the simple band hanging from it. "I keep it close until we can make proper use of it." Jackson swallowed hard, emotion raw on his face. "Eleanor Mitchell, you are a remarkable woman. Most would have fled at the first sign of trouble." "I'm not most women," she replied simply. "Now tell me everything you know about the rustling incident, every detail. Mr. Parker believes there may be grounds for appeal if we can find new evidence." For the next 20 minutes, Jackson recounted the events surrounding his arrest. The discovery of Hargrove cattle with freshly altered brands on rocking tea land. The 3 witnesses who claimed to have seen him driving the cattle himself. The rapid trial where his own witnesses were discredited or not allowed to testify. "Judge Wilson ruled against me at every turn," Jackson explained. "Wouldn't admit testimony about the Hargrove hands being in the saloon that night. Wouldn't allow questioning about the railroad deal." "And these witnesses against you," Eleanor pressed. "Tell me their names again." "Pete Simmons, Roy Davis, and Frank Miller. All Hargrove hands, been with him less than a year from what I heard." Eleanor committed the names to memory. "Where were they before coming to work for Hargrove?" Jackson frowned. "Not sure. Word was they came from Montana, but I never heard specifics." A guard appeared at the door. "Time's up." Eleanor rose, gathering her resolve. "I'll visit again next week. In the meantime, keep your spirits up. I believe we can prove your innocence, but it may take time." Jackson stood as well, his eyes never leaving her face. "Eleanor, listen to me. If this becomes too dangerous, if Hargrove threatens you in any way, I want you to sell the ranch and go back east. No piece of land is worth your safety." "I didn't cross a continent to give up at the first sign of opposition," she replied firmly. "I'll be careful, but I won't abandon what's ours." The word hung between them, ours, a promise of a shared future neither had anticipated when they began their correspondence. "One more thing," Jackson said, as the guard stepped forward to escort him out. "There's a hidden compartment in my desk behind the right panel. The key is in the hollowed leg of the bedside table in my room. Inside the compartment are documents you might find useful, railroad surveys, water rights, and a journal I kept detailing every interaction with Hargrove and Wilson." Eleanor nodded, memorizing the instructions. "I'll find it." "Time to go, Thornton," the guard insisted. Jackson gave her one last look, filled with emotions too complex to name. "You are nothing like I imagined, Eleanor Mitchell," he said softly. "You're far better." Then he was gone, led back to his cell, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the visitation room, her heart full of renewed determination. She had come to Wyoming to marry a man she knew only through his words on paper. Now she had met him, seen the truth in his eyes, and her resolve was ironclad. She would save Jackson Thornton and the home he had built for them, whatever the cost. The return journey to the rocking tea seemed quicker, now that Eleanor had a clear sense of purpose. As soon as they arrived, she went directly to Jackson's bedroom and located the hollow leg of the bedside table. Inside, just as he had described, was a small brass key. In the study, she carefully examined the right panel of the desk until she found a nearly invisible seam. The key fit perfectly into a concealed keyhole, and the panel swung open to reveal a hidden compartment containing a leather-bound journal and several rolled maps. Eleanor spent that evening poring over Jackson's journal, her heart aching at the increasingly worried tone of his entries in the months leading up to his arrest. He had documented every encounter with Victor Hargrove and Edwin Wilson, every fence cut, every suspicious incident. The final entry, dated the day before his arrest, was particularly chilling. Hargrove approached me again at the feed store. Final offer, he called it. When I refused, he said men like me who stand in the way of progress tend to meet unfortunate ends. Not a threat, he claimed, just an observation. I fear what may come next. Have transferred deed to Eleanor's name as precaution. Must speak with Parker in Cheyenne about additional legal protections. The maps proved equally revealing. Railroad survey documents showed 3 potential routes for the new spur line. But notes in the margins, apparently from meetings Jackson had attended, indicated the route through the Rocking T was vastly preferred due to water access and grade considerations. Most interesting was a water survey that Jackson had commissioned privately. It showed an underground aquifer beneath the eastern portion of the Rocking T, a vast water resource in a territory where water was more valuable than gold. The railroad needs water for the steam engines, Eleanor murmured to herself, and Hargrove's land doesn't have it. Armed with this knowledge, Eleanor called a meeting the next morning with Hollister, Mrs. Bird, and young Michael Quinn. In the ranch house kitchen, over strong coffee, she laid out her findings. Jackson wasn't just framed because he refused to sell, she explained. He was framed because the Rocking T is the only viable location for the railroad depot due to the water supply. The 3 men who testified against him, does anyone know anything about them? Hollister frowned thoughtfully. Drifters showed up at the Double H about 2 months before Jackson's arrest. Rough types, keep to themselves mostly. I need to find out more about them, Eleanor said. If they have criminal backgrounds or connections to Hargrove before coming here, it might help our case. Town gossip says they came from Montana, Mrs. Bird offered. I could ask Lily at the boarding house. People talk freely around her. Good, Eleanor nodded. Mr. Hollister, we need to get the cattle operation back to profitability. How many hands would you need to properly run the ranch? At least 6 more, Hollister replied without hesitation. But good men are hard to find, especially with the Hargroves spreading word that the Rocking T is failing. What about the Dawson spread? Michael Quinn suggested. They're selling out, moving to California. They've got 5 hands who'll be looking for work. Are they reliable? Eleanor asked. Salt of the earth, Hollister confirmed, but they won't come cheap. Eleanor thought for a moment. Mr. Parker believes we can stop the foreclosure based on the deed transfer, but we'll still need operating funds. I have some savings, but not enough. She turned to Mrs. Bird. Jackson mentioned in one of his letters that you have a brother in Denver who's a banker. Mrs. Bird looked surprised. George, yes, he's with the Merchants Trust. Would he consider extending a loan based on the potential value of the ranch once the railroad comes through? With the deed in my name, Wilson's bank has no claim. George has no love for Edwin Wilson, Mrs. Bird said slowly. They were rivals years ago. I could write to him. Please do, Eleanor said. In the meantime, Mr. Hollister, speak with the Dawson hands. Offer competitive wages, with a bonus once the ranch is back to full operation. Hollister nodded, a new respect in his eyes. Yes, ma'am. As the meeting broke up, Eleanor felt a fresh sense of purpose. The path ahead was clear. Prove Jackson's innocence, save the ranch, and build the life they had both envisioned. She had never run a cattle operation, never managed employees, never fought powerful enemies, but she had always been a quick learner, and more importantly, she had nothing to lose and everything to gain. Word of Eleanor's presence and legal claim to the Rocking T spread quickly through Pine Ridge. When she rode into town the following day, she felt eyes watching from every doorway and window. She had dressed deliberately in a practical riding skirt and jacket, her hair neatly pinned beneath a wide-brimmed hat purchased from the general store. If she was to be the mistress of the Rocking T, she would look the part. Her first stop was the telegraph office, where she sent messages to Andrew Parker in Cheyenne regarding their legal strategy and to the prison warden arranging her next visit with Jackson. As she was leaving, Edwin Wilson stepped into her path. "Miss Mitchell," he said, tipping his hat with false courtesy, "I understand congratulations are in order. You've become a property owner rather unexpectedly, Mr. Wilson." Eleanor acknowledged him coolly. "Not unexpected at all. Jackson and I discussed the transfer of the deed months ago in our correspondence." Wilson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "How convenient." Yet, curiously, no mention of this arrangement was made during Mr. Thornton's trial. "Perhaps because Judge Wilson, your brother, I believe, didn't allow discussion of Jackson's property arrangements," Eleanor replied. "Mr. Parker finds that rather interesting, from a legal perspective." A flash of anger crossed Wilson's face. "Andrew Parker should be careful about making accusations against a territorial judge." "He's making no accusations, merely observations," Eleanor said, echoing Hargrove's own words, as reported in Jackson's journal. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to." She moved to step around him, but Wilson shifted to block her path. "Miss Mitchell, let me speak plainly. You're new to our territory and unfamiliar with its ways. A woman alone cannot successfully operate a cattle ranch, especially one facing the difficulties the Rocking T has encountered. I'm hardly alone, Mr. Wilson. I have loyal employees and legal counsel." Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "And I'm a quick study. I'm prepared to offer you a fair price for the ranch," Wilson continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Enough to return east in comfort and put this unfortunate situation behind you." "The Rocking T is not for sale," Eleanor replied firmly. "Now please step aside, unless you intend to physically prevent me from going about my business." Wilson hesitated, aware of onlookers watching their exchange from the boardwalk. Finally, he moved aside with a cold smile. "Think carefully about my offer, Miss Mitchell. It won't remain open indefinitely." Eleanor continued down the street to the general store, her back straight despite the trembling she felt inside. Walter Hawkins greeted her with genuine warmth. "Miss Mitchell, I've been hoping you'd come to town. How are you settling in at the Rocking T?" "Quite well, thank you." She handed him a list of supplies. "We're expanding operations again. I'll need these items delivered by the end of the week." Hawkins reviewed the list, his eyebrows rising. "Feed, seed, fencing supplies. This is quite an investment." "The Rocking T will be running at full capacity by summer," Eleanor said confidently, "and we'll need reliable suppliers. I understand you've been fair with Jackson in the past." "I always try to be, regardless of what others in town think of him." Hawkins lowered his voice. "I saw your exchange with Wilson. Be careful, Miss Mitchell. He and Hargrove don't take kindly to opposition." "So I've gathered," Eleanor replied. "Mr. Hawkins, what can you tell me about 3 of Hargrove's men?" "Pete Simmons, Roy Davis, and Frank Miller." Hawkins frowned. "The witnesses at Jackson's trial? Not much. They keep to themselves, drink heavily when in town. Word is they worked for Hargrove in Montana before coming here." "Has anyone verified that?" "Not that I know of," Hawkins said. "Why do you ask?" "Just trying to understand the situation fully," Eleanor replied vaguely. "One more thing. Can you recommend someone who travels regularly between here and Montana? A freight hauler, perhaps, or mail carrier?" Hawkins thought for a moment. "Jim Calloway runs freight between here and Helena once a month. Honest man, doesn't owe anything to the Hargroves or Wilsons. He's due back tomorrow or the next day." "Thank you, Mr. Hawkins. I'd appreciate it if you'd let me know when he arrives." As Eleanor completed her purchases and prepared to return to the ranch, she became aware of a group of men gathering outside the saloon across the street. Luke Hargrove was among them, watching her with undisguised hostility. When she mounted her horse, he called out, "Enjoying playing rancher, Miss Mitchell? Won't last long?" Eleanor ignored him, turning her horse toward the trail leading out of town. She had ridden less than a mile when she heard hoofbeats behind her. Glancing back, she saw two riders approaching rapidly, Luke Hargrove and one of his father's hands, heart pounding. She urged her horse to a faster pace, but they quickly overtook her, forcing her to rein in as they blocked the trail ahead. "Bit dangerous for a lady to ride alone," Luke said, his smile predatory. "All sorts of accidents can happen." "Mr. Hollister is expecting me," Eleanor replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "He'll come looking if I'm delayed." "Hollister's occupied with a broken fence line on the North Range," Luke informed her with satisfaction. "Won't be looking. For you for hours." Eleanor realized, with a chill, that they had been watching the ranch, tracking the movements of her few employees. She was alone and vulnerable. "What do you want, Mr. Hargrove?" "Just a friendly conversation." Luke moved his horse closer to hers. "Father thinks you might be more reasonable than Thornton. That fancy deed won't help you run cattle. You need men, capital, and respect in these parts, all things you lack." "I'm not selling the ranch," Eleanor stated firmly. "Not to your father, not to Edwin Wilson, not to anyone." Luke's face hardened. "That's unfortunate, because accidents happen to stubborn people in this territory. Ask Thornton." Before Eleanor could respond, the sound of an approaching wagon made Luke turn. Coming around the bend was Sam Hollister, riding beside Michael Quinn in the ranch wagon. Luke cursed under his breath. "Think about what I said, Miss Mitchell. Next time we might not be interrupted." He and his companion wheeled their horses and galloped away across the open range. Eleanor sat motionless, trying to master her trembling before Hollister reached her. "Miss Mitchell," Hollister called as the wagon drew alongside. "Are you all right? We saw Luke Hargrove and Davis riding this way from town." "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice shook slightly. "Just a friendly conversation, according to Mr. Hargrove." Hollister's expression darkened. "I don't like this. They're getting bolder." "They're getting desperate," Eleanor corrected him, regaining her composure. "They know the deed transfer is valid, and they're running out of legal options, which makes them more dangerous, not less," Hollister warned. "You shouldn't ride alone until this is settled." Eleanor nodded reluctantly, acknowledging the wisdom of his words. Luke Hargrove's threat had been thinly veiled, and she had no doubt he would make good on it if given the opportunity. "Let's get back to the ranch," she said. "I have news from town and a possible lead on those witnesses." As they rode homeward, Eleanor's mind raced with plans and possibilities. The encounter with Luke had shaken her, but it had also strengthened her resolve. She had come too far and invested too much to be intimidated now. Jackson was counting on her, and she would not let him down. The rocking T was becoming her home, its wide skies and rolling pastures seeping into her heart day by day. And she would fight for it with everything she had, her intelligence, her determination, and a courage she hadn't known she possessed until Wyoming had demanded it of her. The arrival of the Dawson hands transformed the rocking T almost overnight. Where before there had been an air of abandonment, now activity hummed across the property. Fences mended, cattle rounded up from distant pastures, the damaged east wing of the house under repair. Eleanor watched with satisfaction as the ranch slowly reclaimed its former vigor. Mrs. Bird's brother in Denver had agreed to extend a loan based on the railroad's impending arrival, providing much-needed capital for operations. Eleanor had hired a local girl, Betsy Tucker, to help Mrs. Bird with household duties, freeing Eleanor to focus on management and her investigation into Jackson's case. As April gave way to May, spring brought new grass and calving season. Eleanor found herself waking before dawn each day, learning the rhythms of ranch life from Hollister and the others. By day, she worked alongside them when needed, kept the accounts, and managed supplies. By night, she pored over Jackson's journals and the legal documents Andrew Parker sent from Cheyenne. The lawyer had successfully blocked Wilson's foreclosure attempt, citing the valid deed transfer. The bank had been forced to withdraw its claim, though Wilson had immediately filed a countersuit alleging fraud. It was a delaying tactic, Parker assured her, but one that would take months to resolve in the territorial courts. Eleanor's weekly visits to Jackson became the anchoring points of her new life. Each Saturday, she made the journey to Laramie, bringing news of the ranch, legal developments, and her ongoing investigation into the witnesses against him. With each visit, their relationship deepened, no longer based solely on letters, but on shared purpose and growing affection despite the harsh circumstances of their meetings. "You look different," Jackson observed during her fourth visit. "More weathered," Eleanor suggested with a smile, aware that her hands were now calloused, her face subtly tanned from hours in the Wyoming sun. "I was going to say at home," Jackson replied. "Wyoming suits you." "It's beginning to," she admitted, "though I never imagined becoming a rancher when I answered your advertisement." "I never imagined finding someone who would fight for me like this," he said softly. "Especially someone who had every reason to walk away." The guard cleared his throat, signaling the end of their visit. As always, the parting was difficult, leaving Eleanor with renewed determination to free Jackson from his unjust imprisonment. Her opportunity came unexpectedly when Jim Calloway, the freight hauler Walter Hawkins had mentioned, stopped at the Rocking T on his return from Montana. Eleanor invited him to supper, and over Mrs. Bird's venison stew, carefully steered the conversation toward his travels. "Helena's growing fast," Calloway remarked. "New buildings going up everywhere. They had some trouble last year, though. Big bank robbery. 3 men got away with nearly $20,000. "Did they catch the robbers?" Eleanor asked casually. "One was shot during the escape. The other 2 vanished." Calloway shook his head. "Rumor was they headed south. The Helena Star ran sketches of them for weeks." "I don't suppose you happen to remember what they looked like?" Eleanor pressed. Calloway gave her a curious look. "Matter of fact, I do. One was a big fellow with a scar across his chin. The other was shorter, wiry, with a missing front tooth." He paused. "Why do you ask, Miss Mitchell?" Eleanor exchanged glances with Hollister. "Mr. Calloway, would you recognize these men if you saw them again?" "I reckon I might," Calloway said slowly. "Especially Scarface. That mark was distinctive, from the left corner of his mouth clear across his chin. Would you be willing to take a ride to the Double H with me tomorrow? Just to observe, not to engage." Calloway's eyes widened in understanding. "You think Hargrove's hands are the Helena bank robbers?" "I think it's worth confirming," Eleanor replied. "It would explain why 3 drifters would perjure themselves for Hargrove. They needed a place to hide, and he needed witnesses against Jackson." The next morning, Eleanor, Hollister, and Calloway took positions on a ridge overlooking the Double H ranch yard. Through Hollister's field glasses, they observed the comings and goings of Hargrove's men as they prepared for the day's work. "There," Calloway said suddenly as a tall man emerged from the bunkhouse. "That's him, the one with the scar. They called him Miller in the newspaper accounts." "Frank Miller," Hollister confirmed grimly. "One of the 3 who testified against Jackson. And the smaller one beside him," Calloway continued, "that's his partner. I'd bet my last dollar on it." Eleanor felt a surge of triumph. "Mr. Calloway, would you be willing to make a sworn statement to this effect? It could be crucial evidence for Jackson's appeal." Calloway hesitated. "The Hargroves are powerful in this territory, Miss Mitchell." "So is justice, Mr. Calloway," Eleanor replied. "And so is $20,000 in stolen money. The reward must be substantial." $5,000, Calloway admitted, "but no one's claimed it because no one knew where they'd gone." "Until now," Eleanor said. "I'm not asking you to confront them, just to sign a statement for Mr. Parker and, if necessary, testify in court." After a long moment, Calloway nodded. "All right, for Jackson Thornton. He was always fair with me, which is more than I can say for the Hargroves." They were preparing to leave when movement near the main house caught their attention. Victor Hargrove emerged, accompanied by Edwin Wilson. The two men spoke intently, heads close together, before Wilson mounted his horse and rode off in the direction of Pine Ridge. "That can't be good," Hollister muttered. "Those two plotting together never bodes well." Eleanor agreed, but her mind was already racing ahead to the implications of their discovery. If they could prove that Hargrove had knowingly harbored fugitives and used them to frame Jackson, it would destroy both the rustling case and Hargrove's reputation in the territory. "Let's get back to the ranch," she said. "Mr. Calloway needs to write out his statement, and I need to send a telegram to Mr. Parker immediately." They had just crested the hill leading back to Rocking Tea Land when Eleanor spotted smoke rising from the direction of the ranch house. At first, she thought, it might be from the cook fire, but as they drew closer, she realized with horror that the smoke was too thick, too dark. "Fire!" Hollister shouted, spurring his horse forward. They galloped the remaining distance, rounding the final bend to find the east wing of the ranch house, the recently repaired section, fully engulfed in flames. Ranch hands were forming a bucket brigade from the well to the house, while Mrs. Bird and Betsy Tucker salvaged what they could from the rooms nearest the fire. Hollister leaped from his horse and joined the firefighting effort. Eleanor rushed to Mrs. Bird's side. "What happened?" she demanded, helping the older woman with an armload of books from the study. "Started in the east wing not 30 minutes. After you left," Mrs. Bird gasped, her face streaked with soot. "Michael spotted it first, but it was already taking hold." "Everyone's accounted for?" Eleanor asked. "Yes, thank the Lord, but the fire's spreading fast." For the next 3 hours, Eleanor worked alongside everyone on the ranch to battle the blaze. Her arms ached from passing buckets, her lungs burned from smoke, but she refused to yield. By mid-afternoon, they had finally contained the fire, though. The entire east wing was lost, and smoke damage extended throughout much of the main house. Exhausted, filthy, and disheartened, Eleanor surveyed the damage from the yard. The beautiful home Jackson had prepared for her was half destroyed. Worse, she knew this was no accident. The timing, coming immediately after their discovery at the Double H, was too convenient. "It was deliberate," Hollister confirmed, joining her with a blackened section of wood in his hand. "Found this in what's left of the east parlor, kerosene soaked. Someone broke in, doused the place, and set it alight." "Hargrove," Eleanor said flatly. "Most likely," Hollister agreed. "Or his men on his orders." "Miss Mitchell," Michael Quinn approached, leading a winded horse. "Rider coming fast from town. It's Walter Hawkins." The storekeeper reined in his horse, his usually friendly face grim with urgency. "Miss Mitchell, thank God you're safe. I came as soon as I heard." "Heard what, Mr. Hawkins?" Eleanor asked. Dread, a pooling in her stomach. "There's a warrant out for your arrest," Hawkins said. "Sheriff Travis came into the store not an hour ago with the papers. Wilson's claiming you forged the deed to the Rocking Tea, that your signature as Eleanor Mitchell doesn't match documents you signed in town as Eleanor Harrison." Eleanor stared at him in confusion. "Harrison? I've never used that name. They're saying you were married previously, that your legal name is Eleanor Harrison, and that you committed fraud by signing the deed as Mitchell." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Wilson must have found someone named Eleanor Harrison to sign documents, then claimed they're mine. She turned to Hollister. "He's trying to invalidate the deed by claiming I used a false name." "There's more," Hawkins continued grimly. "Luke Hargrove is swearing that you confessed to the forgery when he spoke with you on the trail last week. Says you were desperate for money after being widowed." "That's absurd," Eleanor exclaimed. "He threatened me, but we spoke of nothing like that." "His word against yours," Hollister said grimly, "and with his father's influence." Eleanor's mind raced. The fire, the arrest warrant. The Hargroves and Wilson were moving quickly to neutralize the threat she and Calloway posed. Mr. Hawkins, how long before Sheriff Travis arrives here? He was gathering a posse when I left. An hour, maybe less. Eleanor made a swift decision. Mr. Hollister, I need to leave immediately. If I'm arrested, I can't help Jackson or protect the ranch. Where will you go? Hollister asked. Cheyenne. Mr. Parker can help me fight these charges properly, with legal protection. She turned to Calloway. Will you take me? You know the back. Trails better than anyone. Calloway nodded without hesitation. We can be in Cheyenne by tomorrow night, if we push hard. Mrs. Bird, Eleanor called. I need whatever documents we saved from the fire. Jackson's journal, the railroad surveys, everything from the hidden compartment. Already secured, Mrs. Bird assured her, hurrying toward the undamaged portion of the house. Betsy and I got them out first thing. Eleanor moved quickly, gathering only essentials, a change of clothes, Jackson's documents, the deed to the ranch, and what money they had in the house safe. Within 20 minutes, she was mounted on her fastest horse, the precious papers. Secured in saddlebags. Mr. Hollister, you're in charge until I return, she instructed. Tell Sheriff Travis the truth, that I've gone to consult with my attorney in Cheyenne regarding these false accusations. Make it clear I'm not fleeing. Justice, just seeking proper legal counsel. What about the ranch? Hollister asked. If they invalidate the deed, they still need to prove their case in court, Eleanor said firmly. That will take time. Meanwhile, keep operations running. Don't let them think they've won. With a final look at the smoking ruins of the East Wing, Eleanor rode out with Jim Calloway, taking a little-used trail that skirted the boundaries of rocking tea land. They had barely reached the trees when the sound of approaching riders echoed from the direction of town. Just in time, Calloway muttered. Keep low and follow me. For the next several hours they pushed their horses hard, taking advantage of Calloway's knowledge of the territory to avoid main trails and potential pursuit. By nightfall, they had covered nearly 30 miles through increasingly rugged country. We'll rest here, Calloway finally announced, indicating a sheltered hollow beside a small creek. Horses need it, and so do we. Eleanor dismounted gratefully, her muscles screaming in protest after the long day of firefighting followed by hard riding. As Calloway tended the horses, she gathered wood for a small, well-concealed fire. You think they'll follow? She asked, as they shared a meager supper of jerky and hardtack from Calloway's saddlebags. Travis might if Wilson pushes him, Calloway replied. But he won't know these trails like I do. We'll be in Cheyenne before they get halfway there. Eleanor nodded, taking comfort in his confidence. Still, as she stretched out on her bedroll beneath the vast Wyoming sky, sleep eluded her. Her mind churned with the day's events, the discovery of the fugitives' identities, the fire, the fraudulent warrant. The Hargroves and Wilson were playing a dangerous game, and the stakes had just risen dramatically. Most concerning was what this meant for Jackson. If she was discredited, if the deed was invalidated, his chances for appeal would suffer a serious blow. Without her testimony and the evidence she had gathered, he might serve his full 5-year sentence, by which time the rocking tea would surely be lost. Dawn found Eleanor already awake, helping Calloway prepare for another day of hard riding. They set out as the first light touched the eastern horizon, following game trails and dry creek beds, always staying clear of established routes. By mid-afternoon, they had reached more populated areas where concealment became difficult. Calloway led them on a wide detour around a small settlement, adding miles to their journey but reducing the risk of being spotted. Railroad track up ahead, Calloway announced as they crested a ridge. Once we cross it, we're in Laramie County. Cheyenne's about 4 hours beyond. They descended toward the tracks cautiously. Just as they were about to cross, the thunder of approaching hooves made them rein in sharply. From around a bend in the rail line came 4 riders moving fast, and Eleanor recognized Luke Hargrove in the lead. Back, Calloway hissed, pulling his horse into the shelter of a stand of cottonwoods. They must have guessed our destination and cut across country to intercept us. How did they get ahead of us? Eleanor whispered, her heart pounding. Telegraphs. Move faster than horses, Calloway replied grimly. Wilson probably wired ahead to Hargrove's contacts in this area. They know these lands as well as I do. Luke and his men reined in at the tracks, scanning the surrounding terrain. Eleanor held her breath, praying the trees provided sufficient cover. Spread out, Luke ordered, his voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. They have to. Cross the tracks somewhere. Mitchell's heading for Cheyenne, and this is the only way through these hills. The riders separated, two heading east along the tracks, two west. When they were out of immediate sight, Calloway turned to Eleanor. They've got us pinned, he said quietly. They know we're near, and they're watching the obvious crossings. We'll have to go around, way around. How much longer will that take? Eleanor asked, dismayed. At least an extra day, Calloway admitted, and we're low on supplies already. Eleanor considered their options. Every hour of delay increased the risk that Wilson would persuade a territorial judge to invalidate the deed based on the false Harrison documents. Without legal standing, she would lose everything. The ranch, her ability to help Jackson, perhaps even her freedom if the forgery charges stuck. There's another option, she said slowly. The Wyoming Territorial prison is closer than Cheyenne. From here, Calloway looked at her in surprise. You want to turn yourself in? No, Eleanor replied. I want to see Jackson. If we can't reach Parker in Cheyenne, perhaps Jackson knows someone who can help. Another lawyer, a sympathetic guard, anyone. At the very least, I need to tell him what's happening before Wilson's version reaches him. Calloway considered. It's risky. The prison will have been notified about your warrant. I'll use your name to request a visit, Eleanor suggested. Jim Calloway, business associate of Jackson Thornton. Once I'm inside and speaking with Jackson, they can't simply drag me away without cause. Calloway didn't look convinced, but he nodded reluctantly. It's your decision, Miss Mitchell, but if we do this, we need to move now, before Hargrove's men circle back. They waited until the riders had moved further along the tracks, then slipped across the rails and headed southwest, toward Laramie. The detour cost them precious hours, and darkness had fallen by the time they made camp in a shallow ravine. We should reach the prison by mid-morning, Calloway estimated, if we're lucky. Luck, however, was not with them. Shortly after dawn, as they were breaking camp, the sound of horses approaching sent them diving for cover. 8 riders appeared on the ridge above them. Luke Hargrove, his brother Matthew, and 6 hands, all heavily armed. Well now, Luke called out, his voice mockingly triumphant. If it isn't the school teacher turned rancher, having trouble with the law, Miss Mitchell? Eleanor stood her ground, though her heart hammered in her chest. The only trouble I have, Mr. Hargrove, is with men who commit arson and fraud to steal what isn't theirs. Luke's face darkened. Bold words from a woman facing prison for forgery. Sheriff Travis is very interested in speaking with you, as is Judge Wilson. I'm on my way to see my attorney, Eleanor replied coldly. Unless you intend to prevent me by force? No force needed, Luke smiled unpleasantly. Just a citizen's arrest. He pulled a folded paper from his vest. I have a copy of the warrant right here. You'll be coming with us to Pine Ridge. Calloway moved to stand beside Eleanor, his hand near his holstered pistol. 8 against 2, he said quietly. Poor odds. I like our chances better than hers in a Pine Ridge jail cell, Eleanor murmured back. Then louder, Mr. Hargrove, I have evidence that 2 of your father's hands are wanted fugitives from Montana, bank robbers, with a $5,000 reward on their heads. How do you think that will look in court alongside your arson and false accusations? Uncertainty flickered across Luke's face, quickly replaced by anger. You're bluffing. Jim Calloway recognized them, Eleanor pressed. He's already written. A sworn statement identifying Frank Miller and Roy Davis as the Helena bank robbers. That statement is safely on its way to the Territorial Governor's office as we speak. It was a desperate bluff. The statement was in her saddlebag, but Luke's reaction told her she had struck a nerve. "Take them," he ordered his men. "Alive, but don't be gentle about it." What happened next unfolded in a blur. Calloway drew and fired in one smooth motion, hitting the man nearest Luke. Eleanor grabbed the reins of her horse as gunfire erupted around them. Calloway shoved her toward the animal. "Ride," he shouted. "Head for the prison. I'll hold them off." Eleanor swung into the saddle, clutching her saddlebags with their precious documents. A bullet whined past her ear as she spurred her horse forward, crashing through underbrush and down the slope of the ravine. Behind her, Calloway's revolver barked twice more before being drowned out by a volley of return fire. She didn't look back, couldn't look back. Calloway had given her the chance to escape, and she wouldn't waste it. The prison was less than 15 miles away. If she could reach it, she would find safety and the chance to see Jackson one last time before facing whatever came next. Her horse, sensing her urgency, stretched into a full gallop across the open ground beyond the ravine. In the distance, she could see the spire of Laramie's church steeple, and beyond it somewhere, the fortress-like walls of Wyoming Territorial Prison, where her only hope of salvation now lay. Eleanor's horse was lathered and heaving by the time the imposing stone walls of Wyoming Territorial Prison came into view. She had pushed the animal hard, constantly glancing over her shoulder for signs of pursuit. The distant sound of hoofbeats told her Luke Hargrove and his men weren't. Far behind, the prison guard at the main gate raised his rifle as she galloped toward him. "Halt!" he shouted. "State your business." Eleanor reined in her exhausted mount, fighting to catch her breath. "I need to see Warden Hayes immediately. It's a matter of life and death." The guard eyed her suspiciously, taking in her disheveled appearance, torn riding clothes, hair escaping its pins, face streaked with dirt and sweat. "Name?" For a split second, Eleanor hesitated. If news of the warrant had reached the prison, giving her real name might result in immediate arrest. But lying would only make matters worse. "Eleanor Mitchell. Please, there are armed men pursuing me. I have evidence of corruption involving a prisoner here, Jackson Thornton." At the mention of Jackson's name, the guard's expression changed slightly. "Wait here," he ordered, and signaled to another guard in the watchtower before disappearing. Inside the gate, Eleanor turned her horse to face the direction she had come from, heart pounding. In the distance, riders appeared on the horizon, moving fast. Luke Hargrove and at least 4 others had followed her trail. The gate creaked open behind her. "Miss Mitchell, bring your horse inside, quickly." She didn't hesitate, urging her. Weary mount through the gate, which clanged shut just as the pursuing riders came within hailing distance. Through the iron bars, she could see Luke Hargrove rein in furiously, shouting something she couldn't make out. A stern-faced man in a neatly pressed uniform approached. "I'm Warden Hayes. The guard says you claim to have evidence regarding prisoner Thornton." "Yes, sir," Eleanor said, dismounting on shaky legs. "And those men outside are trying to prevent me from presenting it. There's a fraudulent warrant for my arrest in Pine Ridge, orchestrated by the same people who framed Jackson Thornton." Hayes glanced toward the gate, where Luke Hargrove was now demanding entrance. "That's Luke Hargrove. His father has considerable influence in these parts. His father conspired with Edwin Wilson to send an innocent man to prison," Eleanor stated, firmly. "I have evidence, including a witness who can identify 2 of Hargrove's ranch hands as wanted bank robbers from Montana, the same men who testified against Jackson." Hayes studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "These are serious allegations, Miss Mitchell." "Yes, sir, they are. And I'm prepared to substantiate every one of them." Something in her steady gaze must have convinced him. "Very well. Come to my office. We'll sort this out there." He turned to one of the guards. "Tell Hargrove this is a state penitentiary, not a town jail. If he has legitimate business, he can return during visiting hours tomorrow. Otherwise, he can take his grievances to the Territorial Marshal." The warden's office was spartanly furnished, but meticulously organized. Hayes gestured Eleanor to a straight-backed chair and took his seat behind a massive desk. "Now, Miss Mitchell, I understand you're Thornton's fiancée." "Yes, sir. And you believe he was wrongfully convicted?" "I know he was," Eleanor replied, opening her saddlebag. She withdrew the documents she had salvaged from the ranch, Jackson's journal, the railroad surveys, and most importantly, Jim Calloway's signed statement identifying Miller and Davis as the Helena bank robbers. "I also have reason to believe the judge who presided over Jackson's trial had a conflict of interest," she continued. "Judge Wilson is the brother of Edwin Wilson, who stands to gain financially from Jackson's conviction. The railroad is planning a spur line through rocking tea land, which increases its value substantially." Hayes reviewed the documents with methodical thoroughness, his expression gradually shifting from skepticism to concern. "This statement from Calloway," he said finally. "Where is he now?" Eleanor's voice caught. "He stayed behind to hold off Hargrove's men while I escaped. I fear he may have been killed." Hayes nodded grimly. "If these allegations are true, particularly about harboring fugitives, this goes beyond a simple case of cattle rustling." He reached for a blank sheet of paper. "I'm going to wire the Territorial Governor and Marshal's office in Cheyenne immediately. In the meantime, I'll arrange for you to see Thornton." Relief flooded through Eleanor. "Thank you, Warden." "Don't thank me yet," Hayes cautioned. "There's still the matter of the warrant from Pine Ridge. Until we sort that out, you'll need to remain here under protective custody." "I understand," Eleanor agreed, too exhausted to argue. Safe inside the prison walls, she finally allowed herself to acknowledge how close she had come to disaster and how much she had lost. Jim Calloway's sacrifice, the damage to the ranch house, the danger to Hollister and the others who had remained behind. The cost of justice was mounting by the hour. When she was finally led to the visitor's room, Jackson was already waiting. He rose instantly at the sight of her, alarm crossing his features. "Eleanor, what happened?" The guard, unusually considerate, stepped outside and closed the door, leaving them a rare moment of privacy. Eleanor crossed to Jackson and, breaking all prison rules, threw her arms around him. He held her tightly, his solid presence the first true comfort she had felt in days. "They burned part of the ranch house," she said against his chest. "Hargrove and Wilson. They filed false charges against me, claiming I forged the deed. Luke, Hargrove chased me all the way here. Jim Calloway helped me escape, but I think they killed him." Jackson stroked her hair, letting her speak until the torrent of words slowed. Then he gently set her back to look into her face. "Start from the beginning," he said softly. "Tell me everything." For the next 20 minutes, Eleanor recounted the events of the past week. The discovery about Miller and Davis being wanted, fugitives, the fire, the fraudulent warrant claiming she had used a false name, and finally her desperate flight to the prison. "Warden Hayes is wiring the governor," she finished, "but I'm afraid of what might happen at the ranch while I'm away. Hollister and the others could be in danger." Jackson's face had grown increasingly grim as she spoke. "This has gone far beyond a land grab," he said. "Hargrove and Wilson are committing multiple felonies now, harboring fugitives, arson, filing false charges. They're desperate, because we're close to proving your innocence," Eleanor said. "Calloway's testimony would have destroyed their case against you." "And they know it," Jackson agreed, "which is why they're willing to take such risks." He paced the small room, thinking, "We need the Territorial Marshal involved now. This is beyond the jurisdiction of Sheriff Travis in Pine Ridge." "Hayes is contacting them," Eleanor assured him, "but it will take time for anyone to arrive from Cheyenne." Jackson nodded, then made a decision. "There's someone else who can help us. Someone I've been reluctant to involve until now." He returned to the table and lowered his voice. My brother-in-law, Daniel Garrett. He's a federal judge in Denver. Eleanor stared at him in surprise. You never mentioned having family connections to a judge. Because I wanted to handle my legal troubles without dragging my sister and her husband into it, Jackson explained. Sarah, my sister, begged me to contact Daniel after my conviction, but I was too proud. I thought I could fight this on my own. But now innocent people are being hurt. You, Calloway, my loyal hands at the ranch. Pride has no place anymore. Jackson took her hands in his. Write to Daniel immediately. Tell him everything. He has the authority to issue a federal stay on all proceedings related to the Rocking T until a proper investigation can be conducted. Eleanor squeezed his hands, a flicker of hope rekindling in her heart. I'll do it as soon as I leave here. There's something else, Jackson said, his voice dropping further. Something I've never told anyone. He glanced toward the door to ensure they were truly alone. I believe Victor Hargrove was involved in another crime years ago, one that was never solved. What crime? The murder of Sheriff Blackburn in Pine Ridge 12 years ago. Blackburn was investigating cattle theft from several small ranches in the area, all properties that Hargrove later acquired when the owners gave up and sold out. Eleanor's mind raced with the implications. Do you have proof? Not directly, but there's a former deputy, James Blackburn, the sheriff's son, who left town after his father's killers were never brought to justice. Last I heard, he was a marshal down in Arizona Territory. He might have information that could help us connect Hargrove to that old murder. How would that help your case now? It establishes a pattern, Jackson explained. If Hargrove has used violence and intimidation before to expand his holdings, it strengthens our claim that he's doing the same to the Rocking T. The door opened, and the guard stepped back inside. Time's up. Jackson quickly pressed something into Eleanor's hand, a folded piece of paper. Daniel's address in Denver, he whispered, and Sarah's. Contact them both. As Eleanor was escorted back to the warden's office, her mind worked furiously, piecing together everything Jackson had told her. If they could establish Hargrove's history of criminal activity while simultaneously exposing Wilson's conflict of interest in the trial, they might not only free Jackson, but bring down the two men who had conspired against him. Warden Hayes was waiting for her, his expression more favorable than before. I've received a preliminary response from the governor's office, he informed her. They're taking your allegations seriously, especially regarding the Montana fugitives. Marshal Collins is being dispatched from Cheyenne to investigate, and in the meantime, you're to remain here under protective custody. What about the Rocking T? Eleanor asked anxiously. My employees could be in danger. The marshal will stop there first, Hayes assured her. Now, I've had quarters prepared for you in the administrative section. It's not luxurious, but it's secure. Thank you, Warden. May I have paper and ink? I need to write several urgent letters. That evening, in the small but clean room assigned to her, Eleanor wrote 3 letters by lamplight. The first was to Daniel Garrett, Jackson's brother-in-law, detailing everything that had transpired and formally requesting his intervention as a federal judge. The second was to Sarah Thornton Garrett, appealing to her as Jackson's sister and as a woman who would understand Eleanor's determination to save both the man she had come to love and the home he had built for them. The third letter was the most difficult, a message to Sam Hollister at the Rocking T, explaining her situation and warning him to be vigilant until Marshal Collins arrived. She had no way of knowing if the letter would reach him before Hargrove's men returned to the ranch, but she had to try. When she finished writing, she sealed the letters and took them to the warden's office, where Hayes promised to have them dispatched immediately by riders heading to Cheyenne and Denver. Try to rest, Miss Mitchell, he advised. You're safe here for now, and things will look clearer in the morning." But rest came fitfully that night. Eleanor's dreams were haunted by images of fire consuming the ranch house, of Jim Calloway falling beneath a hail of bullets, of Luke Hargrove's vengeful face as he pursued her across the Wyoming plains. She woke at dawn, exhausted but determined. After a simple breakfast, she was surprised when a guard escorted her not back to her room, but to Warden Hayes's office, where the warden was not alone. A tall man in a dusty duster stood by the window, a marshal's badge gleaming on his chest. "Miss Mitchell, this is Marshal Collins from Cheyenne," Hayes introduced them. "He arrived early this morning." Collins turned to face her, lean, weathered, with eyes that missed nothing. "Miss Mitchell," he nodded briefly, "I've reviewed your evidence and Warden Hayes's report. I've also received a telegram from Judge Garrett in Denver ordering a stay on all legal proceedings regarding the Rocking T Ranch pending federal investigation." Eleanor's heart leapt. That was fast. "I only wrote to him last night. Appears Thornton wrote to his sister weeks ago, after all," Collins explained. "Didn't tell you because he didn't want to worry you. Judge Garrett was already looking into the case when your letter arrived." Relief and irritation mingled in Eleanor's chest. Typical of Jackson to try to protect her, even from within prison walls. "What happens now, Marshal?" "I've sent deputies to the Rocking T to ensure your people's safety," Collins said. "I'm heading to Pine Ridge today to interview Sheriff Travis and examine the alleged evidence against you." "And the Montana fugitives?" "I've wired the Helena authorities. If your identification holds up, I'll be arresting Miller and Davis, and possibly Victor Hargrove for harboring known fugitives." For the first time in days, Eleanor felt a flicker of genuine hope. "What about Jim Calloway?" Collins's expression sobered. "We'll search for him, but given what you've described—" "I understand," Eleanor said quietly. "Calloway's sacrifice wouldn't be forgotten, whatever they found." "There's something else you should know," Collins continued. "I've received information about a former deputy named James Blackburn, who might have evidence linking Hargrove to an unsolved murder from 12 years ago." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Jackson just told me about that yesterday. How did you—" "Judge Garrett," Collins explained. "Seems Thornton's been more thorough in his correspondence than you realized. Blackburn's on his way from Arizona. Should arrive within the week." The pieces were falling into place faster than Eleanor had dared hope. With Marshal Collins investigating, Judge Garrett's federal intervention, and potentially damning evidence. From Blackburn, the tide was finally turning in their favor. "Miss Mitchell," Warden Hayes spoke up, "in light of these developments, I believe it's safe for you to return to the Rocking T under Marshal Collins's protection. The fraudulent warrant has been temporarily suspended by Judge Garrett's order." "Thank you, Warden," Eleanor said sincerely. "When can we leave?" "This afternoon," Collins replied. "I've business in Laramie this morning. Be ready to ride by 2:00. The journey back to the Rocking T was tense but uneventful. Marshal Collins was taciturn but vigilant, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon as they rode. They stopped briefly in Pine Ridge, where Collins met with Sheriff Travis, while Eleanor waited anxiously in the marshal's office, avoiding the curious stares of townsfolk through the window. When Collins returned, his expression was grimly satisfied. "Travis is cooperating," he informed her as they remounted. "Seems he was uncomfortable with Wilson's tactics all along, but felt pressured. He's provided copies of all documents related to your case and Thornton's, including the alleged Eleanor. Harrison papers," Collins nodded. "Crude forgeries, from what I can tell. We'll have a handwriting expert examine them, but I don't think Wilson expected them to withstand real scrutiny. He just needed a pretext to arrest you and discredit your testimony." As they approached the Rocking T, Eleanor's anxiety grew. The ranch had been undefended for days. What would they find? To her immense relief, as they crested the final hill, she saw not destruction but signs of continued operation. Cattle grazed in the near pastures. Smoke rose from the chimney of the partially rebuilt ranch house, and in the yard, ranch hands were hard at work on repairs. Sam Hollister came running from the barn as they rode in, his weathered face breaking into a rare smile at the sight of her. "Miss Mitchell, thank God you're safe." Eleanor dismounted quickly, nearly stumbling in her haste. "Mr. Hollister, is everyone all right? What happened after I left?" Sheriff Travis came with his posse, but when he found you gone, there wasn't much he could do, Hollister explained. Luke Hargrove and some of his men showed up the next day, threatening to burn the rest of the place if we didn't tell them where you'd gone. But we'd moved most of the cattle to the North Range and positioned the hands strategically. A hint of pride crept into his voice. They decided not to push their luck. And the repairs? Eleanor gestured to the east wing, where new timber framing was already in place. Mrs. Bird's brother came through with more than just the loan, Hollister said. Sent a crew of carpenters from Denver. Said no niece of his, that's what he's calling you now, was going to live in a half-burned house. Tears sprang to Eleanor's eyes at this unexpected kindness from a man she had never met. And Mrs. Bird? Betsy? The others? All fine, Hollister assured her, though Mrs. Bird's been wearing a path in the floorboards worrying about you. As if summoned by her name, the housekeeper appeared on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, don't just stand there in the yard," she called. "There's hot food waiting, and you look like you haven't had a decent meal in days." Eleanor turned to Marshal Collins. "Please join us. We can discuss next steps over supper." Inside, the ranch house smelled of fresh-cut wood and Mrs. Bird's cooking. The damage from the fire had been contained to the east wing, and the main rooms were much as Eleanor had left them. As they settled around the dining table, with Hollister joining them after seeing to Collins's horse, Eleanor felt a profound sense of homecoming. Over a hearty meal of venison stew and fresh biscuits, Collins outlined his plan. "I'll be heading to the Double H tomorrow to arrest Miller and Davis. I have deputies positioned to ensure they don't flee when word reaches Hargrove." "What about Victor and Luke?" Eleanor asked. "If I can confirm they are knowingly harbored fugitives, they'll be arrested as well," Collins assured her. "And once Blackburn arrives from Arizona, we'll investigate the old murder case too." "Do you think it's enough to secure Jackson's release?" Hollister asked the question on everyone's mind. Collins considered carefully before answering. "With Judge Garrett's involvement, and if the Montana witnesses are proven false, I'd say Thornton's chances are better than good. The governor has the power to pardon in cases of proven injustice." Eleanor's heart swelled with hope. After weeks of struggle, danger and setbacks, justice finally seemed within reach. The rocking T was still standing, her allies were safe, and powerful forces were now moving against Hargrove and Wilson. As the discussion continued into the evening, Eleanor found herself thinking of Jackson, alone in his cell, but perhaps finally allowing himself to hope as well. She remembered the wonder in his eyes when he had first seen her in the prison visiting room, the strength in his embrace despite their dire circumstances. She had come to Wyoming as a mail-order bride, seeking a husband and a new life. What she had found instead was her own strength, a cause worth fighting for, and a love that had been tested by fire and separation, and had emerged stronger for it. Outside, the sun was setting over the rocking T, painting the rebuilt framework of the East Wing in golden light. Eleanor Mitchell, once a Philadelphia schoolteacher, now a Wyoming rancher and fighter for justice, watched through the window and allowed herself at last to envision a future where Jackson would stand beside her on that porch, a free man reclaiming the home he had built for both of them. The arrival of James Blackburn from Arizona Territory created a stir in Pine Ridge. tall and broad-shouldered like his father had been, with silver threading his dark hair and a badge pinned to his vest. The former deputy turned. Marshall stepped off the stagecoach with the wary eyes of a man returning to painful memories. Eleanor and Marshal Collins met him at Hawkins' general store, away from prying eyes. Blackburn's handshake was firm, his gaze appraising as Collins made the introductions. "Miss Mitchell," he acknowledged, "I understand you're the one who stirred up this hornet's nest after all these years." "Not intentionally," Eleanor replied. "I came to marry Jackson Thornton and found myself fighting to free him instead." Something in her directness seemed to impress Blackburn. His stern expression softened slightly. "Thornton's a good man. Never believed he was guilty of rustling." "That's why we need your help," Collins interjected. "Miss Mitchell and Thornton believe Victor Hargrove may have been involved in your father's murder 12 years ago." Blackburn's jaw tightened. "I've suspected as much since the day they found Pa shot in the back out by Cottonwood Creek. But suspicion isn't proof. What if we could connect Hargrove to other crimes?" Eleanor asked. "We know he harbored fugitives from Montana who testified falsely against Jackson. 2 of his hands, Miller and Davis, are wanted bank robbers." "Miller and Davis are in custody," Collins confirmed. "Picked them up 3 days ago. They're talking now, hoping to save themselves from the gallows." Blackburn considered this. "What exactly do you need from me?" "Your father's investigation notes," Eleanor said. "Jackson mentioned that Sheriff Blackburn was looking into cattle theft from small ranches before his murder, ranches that Hargrove later acquired. I kept Pa's journal and case notes," Blackburn admitted. "Never could let it go. Brought them with me." "We need to establish a pattern of criminal behavior," Collins explained. "If Hargrove used intimidation, theft, and possibly murder to expand his holdings in the past, it strengthens our case that he framed Thornton to acquire the rocking tea." Blackburn nodded slowly. "I'll help. For my father's memory, and because Thornton deserves justice." His eyes hardened. "But I want to be there when you arrest Hargrove." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Collins agreed. The next week passed in a whirlwind of activity. Eleanor divided her time between the ranch, where reconstruction of the East Wing continued apace and assisting Collins and Blackburn with their investigation. Each day brought new developments, new pieces fitting into the puzzle of corruption that had ensnared Jackson, Miller, and Davis, facing the prospect of hanging. For their crimes in Montana had begun to cooperate. Davis, the younger and more nervous of the two, was particularly forthcoming, confirming that they had never witnessed Jackson rustling cattle. Instead, Luke Hargrove had orchestrated the entire scheme, planting the stolen cattle on rocking tea, land and coaching the hired hands on their testimony. More damning still, Judge Wilson's financial ties to his brother's bank and Hargrove's land deals were exposed through records obtained by Judge Garrett from Denver. The judge had received consulting fees from both parties shortly before and after Jackson's trial, clear evidence of judicial misconduct. But the most explosive revelation came from Sheriff Blackburn's old journals. The sheriff had documented a series of threatening visits from Victor Hargrove to struggling ranchers, followed in each case by mysterious cattle disappearances that forced the owners to sell. In his final entry, dated the day of his murder, Blackburn had written, "Meeting. Informant at Cottonwood Creek tonight. Claims to have witnessed Hargrove's men altering brands on stolen stock. This could be the evidence we need to bring charges." The informant, a young ranch hand named Thomas Everett, had disappeared after Blackburn's murder, presumed to have fled out of fear. But Blackburn's notes included Everett's description of Hargrove's operation and names of other hands involved, including one that made Eleanor gasp when she read it. Edwin Wilson, she showed Collins the entry. Before he became a banker, he was working for Hargrove back then. "The connection goes deeper than we thought," Collins mused. "Wilson and Hargrove have been partners in crime for over a decade. With the evidence mounting, Marshal Collins obtained warrants for the arrests of Victor Hargrove, Luke Hargrove, and Edwin Wilson on multiple charges including harboring fugitives, obstruction of justice, falsifying evidence, and, in Victor's case, conspiracy to commit murder. On a crisp June morning, Eleanor stood on the porch of the Rocking T, watching as Marshal Collins, James Blackburn, and 4 deputies rode out toward the Double H. Part of her had wanted to accompany them, to witness Hargrove's downfall firsthand, but Collins had firmly refused. Too dangerous, he'd insisted. "We don't know how they'll react when cornered. Stay here with your people." So she waited, alternating between nervous pacing and forcing herself to attend to ranch business. Hollister kept the hands busy with normal operations, though it felt the tension in the air. Mrs. Bird prepared a midday meal that no one had the appetite to eat. It was late afternoon when the sound of approaching riders brought everyone running to the yard. Marshal Collins led the procession, followed by his deputies escorting 3 prisoners, Victor and Luke Hargrove, and Edwin Wilson, all in handcuffs. Eleanor stepped forward as Collins reined in. "You got them all?" "Not without a fight," Collins replied grimly, gesturing to one deputy whose arm was bandaged. "Luke tried to run. Victor pulled a gun." "Anyone killed?" Eleanor asked anxiously. "No, thankfully, though not for lack of trying on their part." Collins dismounted, stretching his back. "We're taking them to Laramie tonight. Judge Garrett is already there, prepared to convene a special hearing." Victor Hargrove, seated on his horse with his hands bound before him, glared at Eleanor with undisguised hatred. "Enjoy your victory while it lasts, Miss Mitchell. I have friends beyond Wyoming who won't take kindly to these false accusations." "Save it for the judge, Hargrove," Blackburn snapped, yanking the reins of the rancher's horse. "You'll have plenty of time to make speeches during your trial." As the prisoners were led away, Collins approached Eleanor privately. "Miss Mitchell, I'd like you to come to Laramie tomorrow for the preliminary hearing. Judge Garrett believes we have enough evidence not only to bring these men to trial, but to recommend a full pardon for Jackson Thornton." Joy surged through Eleanor, so intense she had to steady herself against the porch railing. "A pardon? So soon?" "The governor's been briefed on the situation. With Federal Judge Garrett overseeing the proceedings and the evidence we've gathered, he's indicated he's prepared to act swiftly to correct this miscarriage of justice." Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. When might Jackson be released? "If all goes as planned," Collins said carefully, "possibly within the week." The news was almost too much to comprehend. After months of struggle, danger, and setbacks, freedom for Jackson seemed suddenly, wonderfully imminent. "I'll be in Laramie tomorrow," Eleanor promised. "First light." That evening, Eleanor could barely contain her excitement as she wrote a letter to Jackson, knowing she would likely deliver it in person the next day. How could she possibly capture in words the emotions swirling within her? The joy, the relief, the anticipation of finally being together without prison walls between them. "My dearest Jackson, by the time you read this, you will already know that Victor and Luke Hargrove, along with Edwin Wilson, have been arrested. What you may not yet know is that Marshal Collins believes a full pardon is likely within days. Our long ordeal is nearly over, my love. Soon you will walk free, returning to the home you built and the life that was stolen from you. And I will be waiting, just as I promised in my very first letter to you after discovering your situation. The Rocking T is healing, much as we all are. The East Wing is nearly rebuilt, the cattle are thriving, and your loyal friends have stood firm through every challenge. This land that you love has proven as resilient as its owner. I came to Wyoming seeking a husband and found instead a battle for justice. But in fighting that battle, I discovered something precious, not just my own strength, but a love deeper and truer than anything I could have imagined in my quiet Philadelphia life. I will see you tomorrow, and hopefully, very soon, we will stand together on the porch of our home, watching the sunset over our land. With all my heart, Eleanor. She sealed the letter, then moved to the window of her bedroom, gazing out at the rocking T, bathed in moonlight. The damaged east wing was now a framework of new timber promising renewal. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully, unaware of the human dramas that had swirled around their home range. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation in court, facing the Hargroves and Wilson as justice finally caught up with them. And then, if God was merciful, Jackson's freedom would follow. The journey that had begun with her stepping off the stagecoach in Pine Ridge, expecting to meet her fiancé only to find him imprisoned, was nearing its conclusion. But another journey, their life together, was just beginning. The Laramie courthouse was packed the following morning. News of the arrests had spread quickly, drawing spectators from across the territory. Eleanor sat in the front row, beside Marshall Collins, dressed in her finest blue dress, her hair neatly arranged beneath a modest hat. She was acutely aware of the whispers and stares directed her way. The Eastern schoolteacher, who had defied powerful men to save her imprisoned fiancé, had become something of a sensation. Judge Daniel Garrett proved to be a distinguished man, in his 50s, with Jackson's same warm brown eyes but a more imposing demeanor. He acknowledged Eleanor with a slight nod before calling the court to order. The proceedings moved with unexpected swiftness. The evidence against the Hargroves and Wilson was presented methodically. Miller and Davis's confession, the financial records showing Wilson's conflict of interest, Sheriff Blackburn's journal detailing the pattern of intimidation and theft, and finally a surprising new witness. Jim Calloway, alive though bearing a healing wound in his shoulder, testified about identifying the Montana bank robbers among Hargrove's hands. His appearance brought gasps from the spectators and a cry of relief from Eleanor, who had believed him dead after the ambush. Played possum after taking a bullet, he explained to her during a recess. Crawled away when they weren't looking. Took me days to reach help, but I wasn't about to let those scoundrels get away with murder on top of everything else. By midday, Judge Garrett had ruled that sufficient evidence existed to hold all three defendants for trial on multiple felony charges, but it was his closing statement that brought Eleanor to the edge of her seat. In light of the evidence presented, today I am recommending to Governor Brooks the immediate issuance of a full pardon for Jackson Thornton, whose conviction was clearly the result of perjured testimony and judicial misconduct. I have prepared the necessary documents, which Marshal Collins will deliver to Cheyenne this afternoon. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Eleanor pressed her handkerchief to her lips, overcome with emotion. Beside her, Collins smiled, the first genuine smile she had seen from the stern lawman. Justice moves slowly sometimes, he said quietly, but today it's galloping. While Collins rode for Cheyenne with the pardon recommendation, Eleanor was granted permission to visit Jackson in the prison. The news had already reached him by the time she arrived, and the change in his demeanor was remarkable. Gone was the careful restraint of their previous meetings, replaced by barely contained elation. "Is it true?" he asked as soon as she entered. "The visitor's room. Daniel thinks the pardon could come by week's end." "That's what he told me," Eleanor confirmed, her own smile radiant. "Marshal Collins rode to Cheyenne with the recommendation this afternoon. Governor Brooks has already indicated his willingness to act quickly." For a moment, they simply gazed at each other, the reality of their imminent reunion almost too wonderful to grasp. "I've waited so long for this," Jackson said softly. "Not just freedom, but the chance to begin our life together properly." "We've already begun it," Eleanor replied. "Every letter, every visit, every battle fought together. Our story started the moment I stepped off that stagecoach in Pine Ridge." Jackson reached across the table, breaking prison rules to take her hands in his. The guard, perhaps moved by their situation, looked away. "When I'm released," Jackson said, his voice low and fervent, "will you marry me immediately? I don't want to wait another day to make you my wife." "Yes," Eleanor answered without hesitation. "I didn't travel across a continent to wait any longer than necessary." 3 days later, on a perfect Wyoming morning, a small group gathered on the porch of the Rocking T Ranch. Eleanor stood beside Jackson, who was dressed in a new suit, his face freshly shaved, his eyes bright with joy and disbelief. After 5 months in prison for a crime he didn't commit, he was home, pardoned fully by the governor's decree, his name cleared, his property secure. Reverend Thomas from the Pine Ridge Church opened his Bible, smiling at the assembled witnesses. Sam Hollister standing tall and proud as Jackson's best man, Mrs. Bird dabbing at tears, young Michael Quinn and the other ranch hands in their Sunday best, Marshall Collins and Jim Calloway representing the law that had finally brought justice, and Judge Garrett with his wife Sarah, Jackson's sister, who had traveled from Denver for the occasion. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend began, "we are gathered here today." Eleanor barely heard the familiar words, so focused was she on Jackson's face, the face she had first seen across a prison table, now transformed by freedom and happiness. When he slipped his mother's ring onto her finger, the same ring she had worn on a chain close to her heart all these months, it fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant for her hand. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the Reverend declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Jackson's kiss was gentle, yet filled with promise, the first of many they would share in the home he had built for them, on the land they had fought to protect. The celebration that followed was joyous, but simple, reflecting the practicalities of ranch life. Mrs. Bird had outdone herself with the wedding feast, and Judge Garrett had brought cases of champagne from Denver. Toasts were raised to the bride and groom, to justice served, and to the future of the Rocking T. As evening approached, the guests gradually departed, heading back to town or to the bunkhouse, leaving Eleanor and Jackson alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and purple. "I've imagined this moment so many times," Jackson said, his arm around her waist, "standing here with you, watching the sun set over our land. But reality is far better than any dream." Eleanor leaned against him, savoring his solid presence. "When I answered your advertisement, I thought I was simply seeking a husband, a new life, away from spinsterhood in Philadelphia. I never imagined I would find such purpose, such strength within myself. You saved me," Jackson said simply, "not just from prison, but from despair. Your letters kept me going when I had nothing else to hold on to." "We saved each other," Eleanor corrected gently, "and now we have a lifetime to build something wonderful together." In the distance, cattle lowed softly as they settled for the night. The newly rebuilt east wing gleamed in the fading light, a symbol of resilience and renewal. Inside, their home awaited, no longer just the house Jackson had prepared for his mail-order bride, but a home they had fought for together. "What shall we do first, Mrs. Thornton?" Jackson asked, still seeming to marvel at being able to call her his wife. Eleanor smiled up at him, her heart full to bursting with love and gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. "Live," she answered simply. "Just live." Hand in hand, they turned toward their home as the first stars appeared in the Wyoming sky, no longer separated by prison walls or threatened by enemies, but united in love and purpose on the land that had brought them together. The mail-order bride who had arrived to find her groom in prison had indeed taken over his ranch until his pardon arrived. But in doing so, she had discovered not just a home or a husband, but her own remarkable strength and the deep, abiding love that would sustain them through whatever challenges the frontier might bring. Up next, you've got two more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.